Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the fifth annual panel discussion on queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities and their mental health. We're so excited to have you all today. Before we get started and we go through all of our introductions and introduce our wonderful panelists, what we're going to do is actually have an opening word from the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Alfonso David. And with that, we'll play the video really quick.
Hello, my name is Alfonso David, and I'm the president of the Human Rights Campaign. I would first like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I'd also like to thank the organizers, Jean-Philippe Regis, Ana Flores, and Raina Nelson, for creating such an important and exciting event, and to the panelists for sharing their experiences and expertise with us. This year and every year, for BIPOC Mental Health Month, we honor our resilience, and in so doing, we must recommit ourselves to ensuring that all LGBTQ people of color are able to thrive. As you may know, LGBTQ people of color face compounded systemic discrimination, including denial of access to necessary care, which takes a significant toll on our health. The determinants of health include poverty, lack of access to health coverage, lack of access to culturally competent care, adequate educational and employment opportunities, and a lack of access to fair and safe housing. These factors are directly correlated to overall poor health outcomes for people of color, specifically Black and Brown communities, facing daily discrimination, harassment, and violence because of who we are. We are further marginalized because those same barriers deny us access to the resources to address the health repercussions of this harm and this trauma. At the Human Rights Campaign and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, we are prioritizing how to address this grave inequity. And we're honored to be in this fight alongside so many amazing leaders and activists who are committed to transforming our systems so that they truly serve all of us. And as we look to the work ahead, we're collectively engaged and have to continue to be invested in this struggle. For those of us who are here tonight as allies, I want to challenge you to change that framing to advocate. Some of you may already be doing this without knowing it. Being an advocate means showing up with action, with continued attention, and with an understanding that our fight for liberation is one and the same. If you're an advocate, that means you don't just tweet about the importance of the Equality Act. You take the next step and you join us in a phone bank. If you're an advocate, that means that you rally when it's down the block and across the country. If you're an advocate, you talk to your friends and your neighbors about why LGBTQ equality is so important and why we cannot mistake the first step for an endpoint. And as we engage in this work, we must also remember to prioritize our own healing and joy. This is not only essential for staying strong in the fight, but it's also part of our movement work. For me, this work means a daily physical and meditative practice, whether yoga or calisthenics, rock climbing or plyometrics. And it means finding time for what fills my cup, strategizing and mobilizing with fellow advocates, listening to jazz, spending time with my family, watching a great movie like Black Girl, rereading the poetry of Jericho Brown or James Baldwin. Whatever fills your cup, I hope that you're able to find and make space for it. Because as warriors for justice, we all know that this work is never easy, but it's always rewarding for us now and for generations that have yet to come. We will only be able to achieve liberation by investing in radical care for ourselves and for others. You're not only our movement's future, you are our mission. And I'm deeply proud to be fighting alongside you for change.
And we're so thankful for Alfonso for those wonderful opening words. And thank you all again for joining us. This is HRC's fifth annual panel discussion on mental health in queer and trans BIPOC communities. My name is Jean-Philippe Regis. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm so excited to introduce all of our great panelists today. We've been doing this event, for 5 years, as I mentioned, and it's really been a pleasure to really shine a light on how mental health may be different for queer and trans BIPOC folks, right? And how those experiences really are important to share. And we're so excited to lean into that and not only have the conversation, but talk about ways that we can go beyond the conversation to ensure that queer and trans BIPOC folks and everyone can get access to the mental health care that they need and all sorts of different pathways to wellness, right? So we're so excited to have everyone here today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. The first panelist that I would like to introduce today is Juan Acosta. He uses he, him pronouns. He's a mental health and LGBTQ plus advocate, a New York Times bestselling author and young leader with Mental Health America. Juan is an award-winning advocate who serves on national committees, speaks at conferences and festivals. And as I mentioned, he's a New York Times bestselling author for a book co-authored with Lady Gaga, Channel Kindness, amazing. He drafted a historic LGBTQ plus proclamation for his hometown of Woodland, California. And he currently serves as one of the regional managers for the Cal Hope Warm Line. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, absolutely. We're so excited to chat today. Our next panelist is Kia Brown. She uses she, her pronouns. She's a journalist, author, actress, and screenwriter. She's the author of The Pretty One, available now via Atria Books, and she has written for the New York Times, Town and Country Magazine, Marie Claire UK, Allure, Harper's Bazaar, and many other publications. A 2018 recipient of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans, Kia and her work have been featured on The Today Show, a number of radio programs, articles, and in her very own TED Talk. She has a picture book titled Sam Super Seats out next year via Coca-Cola Books and is currently working on projects she is really excited about in the film and TV space. We're so excited to have you here today, Kia. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. All right. And then Josh Odom, he uses he, him. He's from the Healing While Black LLC. He's a certified life coach trained in youth and adult mental health first aid and trauma-informed care by the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. In his role as a life coach, he provides comprehensive, quality, and trauma-informed support to help folks actualize their goals. Healing While Black LLC is dedicated to normalizing conversations around health and wellness for Black, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people, for acknowledging that for many of us, we know our mental health is correlated to the oppressive systems, including but not limited to racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and classism, which we navigate daily. We thank you all for the great work you're doing there, and welcome, Josh.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, next up, we have Dr. Helen Sue. She uses she, her pronouns. She's the past president of the Asian American Psychological Association and president-elect of the APA Division 45. Helen is a lead outreach specialist, staff psychologist, Asian American specialist, and lecturer at Stanford University. She is also the chair of the Training Advisory Committee at the American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program. She's also served on the APA Committee on Sexual Orientation and Gender Expression and was a Union City Human Relations Commissioner for 10 years. Her work has focused primarily on intersectional diverse communities, culturally responsive treatment, parenting education, school-based clinical services, grief and loss, and mentorship and leadership training of psychology students. We're so excited to have you here today, Dr. Helen Sue. Welcome.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And last but most certainly not least, we have Kylie Jones, who uses she, her pronouns. She's coming here from on behalf of the Indigenous Circle of Wellness. She's an associate clinical social worker who was born and raised in Riverside, California. She has earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from California Baptist University and her master's of social work from Our Lady of the Lake University. She has worked in the urban Native community within the Los Angeles and Riverside counties for over 10 years. In addition to working with the Native community, She has also worked with low-income individuals in San Bernardino and Los Angeles counties, offering court-mandated psychoeducation courses, treatment, and services within the residential rehabilitation setting, services during acute hospitalization, and short-term counseling. Kylie is a multiracial woman who has a passion for advocacy, outreach, and representation. Her areas of focus include intergenerational trauma, race and ethnic relations, identity development, self-worth, self-esteem development, and life transitions. We're so excited to have Kylie here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing, amazing. Welcome to all of our panelists. And with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so the first question that I want to pose for you all is, why is it important to you that we have conversations about mental health in queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities? And I will start with Kia.
Okay, I think that it's important, particularly because in these communities, we're often taught to be strong and to make sure that we're taking care of everybody else before we take care of ourselves. And having these conversations is going to be the thing that helps us realize that by taking care of ourselves, we are taking care of each other, and we are making sure that our communities are stronger in the first place, in the first, iteration of all these things. It's like, for me as a queer, Black, disabled woman, I find that talking about mental health and the importance of feeling vulnerable and feeling all emotions is the thing that keeps me going every day. Being able to really talk about these things is what allows me to push forward on the days that are bad and the days that are good and those weird days in between. Being able to talk about it is the thing that allows me to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that. We'll go to Juan next, and same question, thinking about why is it important that we have these conversations, specifically about people who are members of both the LGBTQ plus communities and BIPOC communities, right? Why is it important that we have these conversations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I believe our intersectionality is really a topic that should be addressed in the mental health field as a whole. As a gay man, I came to this country at the age of 2 from Mexico. So my experience as both an immigrant coming from a culture that's run by machismo, like I perceive my culture to be in Mexico, which I love my culture, but I do think there's a lot of progress that needs to be done within my culture. Oftentimes growing up in my own experience, I felt like I didn't belong to my culture and I didn't fit in with the LGBTQ plus community quite yet because I didn't understand many things. And part of having these proactive conversations about intersectionality and about our identities is crucial. And in my perspective, I do it because there's other young people who might be experiencing these things who might need to hear from someone who looks like them. That representation aspect of the field is extremely needed. And I believe that when we have these conversations and talk openly, we're able to address something that systemically hasn't been addressed for so many years. Our communities oftentimes haven't been invited to the table for conversations about mental health or about identities. So I believe that making sure that we're holding space for that and talking proactively about both our identities and in those communities in particular is crucial.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Same question, Dr. Sue.
I think, as Juan had mentioned, just having conversations is so fundamental because claiming our own healthy whole identity is core for everyone's mental health. And most of us living in the United States and all of us who are educated in this system, we're taught what in psychology has been called in the research a weird standard. So weird being Western, educated, industrial, rich, democratic, also cishet enabled, that we've been taught like that's some kind of healthy ideal, and it's not. The majority of the world is actually BIPOC, has different ways of being and of being healthy in community. And so it's important we talk about these things to find our own ways of being healthy instead of pathologizing ourselves and trying to be something that is actually very, very narrow.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And one quick thing before I pass this question to Kylie, I actually forgot to introduce our wonderful ASL interpreters that we have with us today. So my apologies for that really quickly. The interpreter that you see on your screen right now is Juan Ramirez. Juan uses he, him, and they, them pronouns. Thank you so much, Juan, for being here. And the interpreter that you saw a moment ago, who will join us again throughout the panel, is Trisha Vasquez, who uses she, her pronouns. We're so excited to have you both today, and thank you both for being on. All right, and with that, Kylie, same question. Why is it important that we have these conversations? Is there, anything specifically that you're thinking QT-BIPOC community should know about this conversation, or even maybe non-QT-BIPOC providers? Like, what are things that we should be thinking about when we talk about the importance of this discussion?
I think that when we talk about it, we bring about the importance it does have, right? And when we keep it quiet, keep it hush, we're continuing to ignore. We're continuing to kind of lessen the importance it has. And when we look back at our cultures, we look back before colonization, this was normal, right? This is where strength came from, power, knowledge in several different cultures. Those that identified now as what we call LGBTQ plus communities were seen as being healers, were seen as being teachers. And now we shy away from that. And that's not normal. And that's not okay. When we talk about this, we bring out the truth. We bring out the realness, and that this isn't a shameful thing. This isn't something to hide. It's something that we can bring out as truth and honor within those around us, within ourselves, within all of our communities.
I absolutely agree. It's so important that we have these conversations. Josh, same question. Why is it important that we have these conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And really talking frankly, like we're in a crisis moment, right? We have been for a very long time. Even amongst Black children right now, just for a moment, the suicide attempt rate for Black children, Black teenagers from 91 to 17 went up 73%, right? So we're actively in a moment, stage of crisis, and those numbers are incredibly worse for Black, queer, trans, and non-conforming kids. Indigenous, queer, trans, and non-conforming kids, two-spirit teenagers. I think about Nigel Shelby to speak of one name out of many others that we know and we don't know. So it's very important to me because it can't be overstated how drastic of a time we're in and how necessary these supports are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And thank you for, sort of reminding us that, when we have conversations like this, sometimes, it's very important that we talk about, some of the clinical aspects and some of the things behind it in our experiences, right? And ultimately, it's remembering that these are actual experiences of folks in our communities, right? And honoring that. So thank you all for answering that first question and opening us up. Thinking about why these conversations are important, here at the Human Rights Campaign, we also think it's very important to start moving beyond these conversations, right? So my next question that I will start out with Dr. Sue. How do you think we begin to move past these types of conversations to create environments and systems that provide access for QT-BIPOC communities to get culturally responsive and LGBTQ inclusive treatment?
Mm-hmm. Such a broad question, but there are levels, right? The things that we experience, they're individual, like individual microaggressions, harassment, but they're very much a part of a system, historical, institutional. And so I think choosing each of us, where can we have impact in these systems? Maybe somebody's just at a bandwidth that they just need to take care of themselves. How do I cope with the microaggressions, take care of my family, chosen family? Those of us who have any kind of institutional position, I think, have a responsibility. And I think right now, as Josh had said, we're in a crisis, and a lot of institutions, schools are in a reckoning of like, are you really anti-racist? Are you really gender affirming? And prove it, with resources, with training. How are we measuring and holding people accountable to do a lot better than we have been doing? So, it's not enough anymore to just put up a flyer or say this is a safe space when we can see that we haven't been able to guarantee safe spaces. How do we actually show we are doing these trainings, we are making a policy change, and that, on the community level, people should be empowered to ask for what they need, to know that that's okay. And I think more and more grassroots efforts are coming along, and with like authors writing and sort of sharing their experiences and voices. That's really powerful for people to be able to even know how to self-advocate.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking about authors who are sharing their experiences, we'll turn to the two authors next, starting with Kia and then going to Juan. Same question, how do you think we begin to move past conversations, create environments and systems that provide access to QTBIPOC communities to get culturally responsive and LGBTQ inclusive treatment?
I guess my biggest hope as a person who tries to tell stories for a living is that not so much that we move past these conversations, but we allow as many people as possible to enter these conversations and do what they can on their own to further them to the next person and reach the next person. Because I think for me, having these conversations about mental health and me being vulnerable about having bad days and good days and the work that I do to make sure that I try to find things that I like about myself every day is the work that is necessary. And so I think for me, in terms of the work that I do, finding a way to bring these conversations to more and more people who might not have initial access is the way to go. Because for me, conversations are the sort of livelihood of talking about, depression and sadness and the weird feelings about how it is to survive in a world that is not designed for you. For me, I walk every day in my life with cerebral palsy. I walk with a limp. And so it's talking about these things every single day and any chance that I get and having these conversations with people who might not recognize them. That is the work that is necessary. So I don't want people to move beyond the conversation, but to maybe branch it out to more people, as many people as possible.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We definitely cannot understate the importance of these conversations and sharing our stories. And to Dr. Sue's point, thinking about how those who are providers and, working in the industry, how they can begin to help us to shift those systems while we're having these conversations, right? And then what can we do on our end to also be empowered? So thank you for that. Juan?
Yeah, I love this question and I love everything they have said so far. I believe, yes, we were born into the system, and I do think it's time to continue to challenge it, but ask for follow through as well, because the system has been challenged for many years and we have gotten little action to truly change something within the system. I believe peer support has been great for our communities because we've been able to get that representation from our peers and from people who might have gone through similar experiences. But I believe in holding our leaders accountable. I believe that the more we go, even at local levels or state levels, and put pressure and ask for things that we need in order to survive is fundamental. Our communities, oftentimes, we operate on a survival mode where we're constantly fighting. And I feel like if we're truly trying to change something, we need to move past being labeled resilient, because our communities also shouldn't be resilient all the time. I believe that we should be able to just live without having to be resilient 24/7, worrying about walking out of our homes because we're dressed a certain way, or because people might assume that we belong to a certain community or identify as something other than what we truly identify for. So I believe in, one, holding local leaders accountable, continued grassroots movements, and talking to your peers and getting that support from there.
Absolutely. And I think you can see from all of the nodding heads on the panel, you have a lot of us in agreement with you. Same question to you, Kylie, and then we'll close with Josh before we move on to the next question.
Yes, most definitely. I agree, especially with the other three panelists, Juan and Dr. Helen and Ms. Brown. Sorry, I forgot your first name there. But it is, right, taking this conversation and spreading it outwards to action, to continued conversations, and taking that where it goes, right? So if we're talking about things that we need and we're not getting it, and we take that action to get it. Does that mean speaking with our local politicians? Does that mean creating those spaces? Does that mean having further conversations, reaching out to other groups? Furthering that spread, almost like a drop in a river where it just spreads out, right? A ripple effect, just kind of goes, right? That's how we move past it, is we take action on it. We further this conversation by taking that action and putting it out there, right? We're empowering each other to be able to speak for what we need. We're empowering each other for taking that action and getting what we need for each other and for ourselves, right? And even Dr. Helen was saying, if you have the capacity just to care for yourself at this time, even that speaking out is caring for yourself. And having that community there with you in that conversation is able to then take that action to go further.
Yes, absolutely. And, to those who are watching this, to Kylie's point, it's really important that when we're having these conversations, that we're spreading it out, right? That we're making sure folks are hearing about the experiences, the mental health experiences in the QT-BIPOC communities. So, when you're watching this, think about who in your life would benefit from hearing it and share it with them. Josh, same question.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, and they're coming from a more systemic level and a resource-based level. How are we supporting the existing clinicians who are queer, who are trans, who are non-binary, who are of color, right? This year has been incredibly daunting, especially for the caretakers. A lot of my colleagues and friends who are clinicians of color, who are queer clinicians of color, are spread thin, right? Are we supporting them? Do we have the resources to protect and support them? And also, to another point, how are we supporting those incoming clinicians? Grad school can be treacherous for especially for Black and Indigenous people of color, especially if you're trying to go for a degree in the caretaking field, in the helping field. Can we pay our clinicians? Can we support them, right? What are the things that we're doing? Show me your budget. Show me your budget. Show me your funding, because that will show me your priorities. And if that is not something that you are actively setting aside money for, and there are systemic reasons for that also, but show me where you're putting your money toward, and I will show you, or I will tell you if this is something, if supporting queer, trans, and non-binary students, children, people of color is something that you actually care about.
Wow, that I agree with that completely. You got me a little fired up over here. That was really great. Thank you for sharing that. With that, I'm gonna sort of shift tracks slightly, and I'm gonna, as we transition to some of the next questions, I'm gonna pose these for, some panelists that I have in mind that I think it will resonate with particularly, and I'll open it up for folks after that to, add anything that they would like. But this next question is, I'm looking to Dr. Sue and Kylie to share your thoughts on this, and then of course everyone else feel free to share. So what do we know about the mental health experiences of those in the QT-BIPOC community? Those who are navigating multiple identities that have been marginalized and oppressed. What do we know about those mental health experiences? We can start with Kylie and then go to Dr. Sue.
Sure. We know that in these spaces, we're not always feeling welcome, and we're not always feeling safe. Therefore, we don't always stay. Many times we would jump from provider to provider to provider until we find somebody we resonate. And if we have the energy to keep jumping, we do. Sometimes we don't, right? My goal into getting into this field was looking for somebody who could resonate with me and not finding it. So I wanted to be that for other people, right? And knowing that representation and inclusion is more than just a statement you put on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. It's really about your culture. It's really about your work culture, your work environment. And with the Indigenous Circle of Wellness, this is something we've really focused on. Our founder, who's an Indigenous woman, really took this to heart when she set up our office. It looks like a living room instead of a mental health facility or place you would go for mental health, because we know that there's this stigma and that there's this trigger with BIPOC communities with mental health, as well as just healthcare in general. We didn't want the reception table, the regular plastic chairs. We have full couches and pillows and like bean bags and everything there that makes it comfortable and welcoming. You want to just go in there, you sit in there, you feel the energy. It's welcoming, it's good, it's positive. Because when we're looking for that, when we don't have that within ourselves at that moment, that's what we're looking for. We don't want another checkbox list, don't want another an assessment. We don't want to have to fit in a box. We want to be heard. We want to be seen. And if we're not getting that, we just leave altogether.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. As someone who's been seeking, therapy services for, well over 10 years, I can definitely relate to that experience and having changed providers for those reasons. Dr. Sue?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. As Kylie said, right, it's totally finding the right space. And maybe there's a theme to everything about what I try to help people think about is changing the narrative we've been taught. There's so many words that are pathologizing for QTBIPOC people, like, are we at risk, non-compliant, early termination, like without asking, well, maybe people left early because this was a negative place, that sometimes so-called healthcare spaces cause harm by not being gender affirming, by making assumptions based on racial things, talking about at-risk populations when it's not because we're BIPOC or queer that makes us at risk, it's because the system is sick. So really changing up like that and practicing from that perspective, right? That again, we're not global minorities. The larger and the more ancient practices all had places for the values and the healthcare practices of QTBIPOC communities, which are now being appropriated weirdly enough, right? Like when white wellness spaces are like, oh, have you heard of mindfulness practices? Well, yes. I mean, they've been doing that in Asia for thousands of years, but really also acknowledging that we do get harmed. And so we do need help and we do suffer and we shouldn't have to just be strong. As Kia said, that racial battle fatigue, the exhaustion of microaggressions, chronic stresses, those are very, very real. And there's data that really show, you're not imagining it. There's data that show how constant racial stress affects your body in measurable ways, as well as your emotional state.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's actually the next question. So I think that's a beautiful transition. And then I'll open it up to other folks to see if anyone else would like to share. But to that point you just made, Dr. Sue, what are some things that folks in our QT-BIPOC community should know about racial trauma and anti-LGBTQ discrimination and violence against our communities and how those impact our mental health? Thinking about how, many of us, and I can speak from my personal experience, I've been gaslit to think that many of these experiences don't have a real impact on my mental health, and that, the things that, sort of the Western medical model assigns to being important determinants of health may not, always align with my experiences. So sometimes we don't always know, that these experiences, to your point, have real effects that have been studied and have been proven. So yes, could you share a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. I mean, just all those points. If you look up racial battle fatigue, microaggressions and health, they affect things like making people reluctant to seek healthcare because they've had negative experiences. There's correlations, for example, in marginalized communities, especially Black communities, even when income is the same and education is the same, there's still more of these chronic stress-related illnesses and worse outcomes, and same for mental health, right? And that's because if you've got a constant flow of adrenals and cortisol going because you're having to deal with being randomly microaggressed at when you're just trying to go grocery shopping or in a work meeting, and the trauma of seeing people in your communities attacked or having your rights legislated against, that's very, very real. So again, it's measurable, you're not imagining things, and it really takes active effort then to figure out what is it that will help you stay balanced and heal.
Yeah, and you're literally like reading my mind in some ways, because there's so many things that you've said there that I really was hoping that we could pull out in this conversation. You know, what I'm hearing and what you just said is not only are all of these things real, but there's a biological component in terms of how your body responds.
Mm-hmm.
And right before I move to Kylie to share her response and move on to everyone else, I'm wondering if you can just expand on that a little bit. Like you said, adrenaline and cortisol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit for folks who may not be familiar with what that means in this context?
Yeah, and I'm guessing everyone here sure knows what it feels like, if not looking up the data. But when we know we're under threat, or when we know people we care about or look like are under threat, our body reacts like we might need to run, or fight or something. And so all these weird symptoms sometimes that clients come and say, I don't know why I'm having migraines or like stomach issues or this like weird rash. It's like, well, our bodies weren't meant to be ready to run every single day of our lives. This is a system that was built for like occasional emergencies. But if you're in a very invalidating, unsafe feeling setting, then those bodily systems for protection are being triggered way too often. And our skin and our digestive system are actually our biggest organ systems. So it's really natural that they'll pick up on some of those things. So I've told people, like, I didn't know for a while why I kept having digestive things and wound up in urgent care and they could never find anything. And then it was like starting to realize, like, oh, it's chronic stressors. It's all the little things. They do impact you, even if it's not like one big thing that you can point to.
Wow. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for indulging me in answering a few extra follow-up questions. Kylie, same question, and I'll just remind you because we kind of talked about a few things there. What are some things that QTBIPOC community should know about racial trauma, anti-LGBTQ discrimination, and violence against our communities, and how those things impact our mental health?
Definitely. Taking it back to just like the basic teachings of like the medicine wheel or the 4 quadrants, right? It's a circle divided in 4 with our emotional, our spiritual, our mental, and our physical health. They're all interconnected. They all work in harmony. So if one of them is out of balance, everything is. So if we're getting physical violence, emotional violence, or even just mental violence of the racial attacks or the LGBTQ plus attacks, right? These are affecting one of those quadrants, if not more, and causing that to be thrown out of whack. And so that can also affect how we process things mentally, how we go through it emotionally, and how we're physically feeling. So if we take that into consideration and realize I actually need to process this, this bring up a lot of emotions, or this has made my body tense and I'm always in this stress feeling, this activated feeling. Well, let me process through this mentally and I can work towards my healing, work back to my harmony and my balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think, to that point, sometimes in our communities, because of how many challenging, sort of systems, or rather oppressive systems, we're forced to navigate, and the challenging experiences that result from that, I think sometimes we can get in survival mode or sort of something adjacent to that, right? And sometimes when you're in those spaces, you may think that something has to be, sort of huge to have an impact on your mental health, right? And something that helped me personally, and unfortunately I'm forgetting who this quote comes from at the moment, but I heard someone say trauma is essentially is too much too fast, right? Like the most basic definition of it is, experiencing trauma means you're experiencing too much too fast, right? And it doesn't always have to be, something very, sort of dramatic or detrimental that's happening. It can just be too much too fast. So with that, I'd like to open, those same questions up to Kia, Josh, and Juan, if you had anything to add, specifically, if anything that, Dr. Sue and Kylie mentioned, if, those sort of resonate with you, and if there's any personal experiences that you'd like to share related to that.
Yeah. I think for me, I really love that they pointed out just the physical symptoms that these things have on ourselves. For our communities, I believe we often look at taking care of our mental health as a luxury because, as you noted, we are constantly fighting or worrying about something that we have to survive or prioritize. And coming from an immigrant family, I saw that with my parents a lot, where a lot was repressed. And those were behaviors that I picked up growing up. And then I started feeling sick, and I didn't know how to describe what I was feeling, and nor did I know terminology when it comes to mental health. I didn't know what depression was. There was language barriers. I was learning the English language, and I think that experience is not just something I went through. I believe many people go through that, trying to destigmatize mental health conversations in the United States for the general public is something, but when you come from an underserved community, there's a bigger factor they have to fight against because you have to push against more. In my experience as a Mexican male, there was machismo, and there's a lot of feelings that men should always be strong and that they should never be vulnerable. But I believe that we are at our strongest when we are vulnerable, when we're able to voice that. But I do believe that there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of education, not necessarily like school education, but in terms of terms that maybe the general public assumes that all communities know. Maybe it's not the same for every community. And I think just making sure that we are adjusting and trying to really be intentional in the services that we're providing can save lives.
Yes, absolutely. Kia and Josh, anything you'd like to add on that, or I can move on to the next question?
I mean, Juan really said it all. I think that I think specifically for me as a Black woman, it's like, you're right, we're told to be strong and we have to make sure that, we're taking care of everyone, and you just have to suck it up. I hear that way more often than anyone should. And I just think that part of that is because people really feel like they need someone to lean on, but who are the people that are being leaning on? And so I always ask the question, who are we taking care of along the way? And how are we talking about these things? And how is it going to affect the people that we're already asking to do the work of taking care of us? And I think for me, like physically, when I'm at my saddest, I already have chronic migraines. So they just sit there for hours, no matter what I take. And I just feel like for me, my body already has a bunch of aches and pains. It's part of cerebral palsy. But I also feel like when I don't feel my best, it is compounded tenfold. And I think a lot of times people think that when we say that, we're just being dramatic. When we say that there's a physical pain, we're just being dramatic and get over it. And once we feel better, then it'll stop. But the reality is it's hard to feel better when there isn't things in place that allow us to even express how we're feeling.
Wow, that's so powerful. What I hear there, Kia, is really sort of an encapsulation of why it's so important that we need to have an intersectional lens when we're having these conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Because, as you just mentioned, all of these things compound, right? They don't go anywhere, right? And when you are experiencing, or when you hold multiple identities that are marginalized, you're experiencing trauma or challenges, from all of those ends, and they all compound, and all of those things are important to understand about the experience of that person. Because if you're, for example, speaking for me, if you're trying to treat me and you're not considering the fact that I'm a first generation Haitian American, or you're not thinking of the fact that I'm non-binary trans femme, or if you're not thinking, about the other mental health challenges I live with and what it's like to live with multiple co-occurring, challenges, right? All of those things. It's really important to consider all of that, because when we're interacting with systems, all of those things come up, right? I'd love to forget about, these things, in some ways, right? But when you interact with these systems, you're forced, unfortunately, to remember them when you realize how they're not meant to serve you, and how they were designed that way. Josh?
Yeah, I was going to make one point about vicarious trauma, especially as a lot of us are on social media. And I'll make it a point, it is a rule on my page, I don't reshare videos or photos of Black and Indigenous people being murdered or being assaulted. That's not how I choose to spread awareness. And that is not uplifting or affirming. There's nothing inspiring about us dying violently, right? That's why, and also knowing what that does for me and what that does for my audience and what kind of trauma vicariously that will subject them to. So being very unapologetic in that, and being very unapologetic in that that's not a thing that I choose to delve in. And unfortunately, there are a lot of pages, a lot of platforms that do that, but this is not going to be one of those things here. And for all the reasons that everyone just mentioned in regards to, this is what we will do, this is what trauma does, this is what exposure to trauma does to the mind, to the body, and the spirit. And I just don't wish to peddle that.
Wow, I agree completely. And you actually made a point that helps us transition to the next question I was going to ask. To your point, we're all, many of us in QTBIPOC communities are consistently witnessing violence against our communities. There's a level of hyper visibility of it now. We all know that these things have happened for far too long. It's not like they're just starting, but the hyper visibility of it does have an impact on us. And there are certain things that, or strategies or coping mechanisms that we sort of need to have in place to navigate those. Josh, you mentioned you don't share those videos, right? And that's one of the things you do for self-care. Expanding on that, I'm gonna, sort of share the broader question and turn to you first for your thoughts there. And then we'll go to Kia and then Juan, and then Dr. Sue and Kylie, if you have anything to add, feel free. So, it's been over a year since the eruption of anti-racist protests, right? It's been over a year since the beginning of the pandemic and quarantine. And within all of that, there's been continued collective racial trauma, continued violence against our communities, right? What things have been helpful for self-care during a time like this for you, or maybe other folks in your community that you've spoken to?
Yeah, it's been really helpful to be amongst community and not have to talk about violence, right? And a lot of us know that this is a part of our collective story, like our communal story, but that is not the totality of it, right? Whenever I get together with the fam, whenever I get together with my friends, we're probably going to talk about something that happened in the news or this person or that person, but knowing that there's also moments of joy. There are a lot of moments of joy that happen, not even in spite of that, in direct response to that, because that is a weapon of ours, which is joy. And knowing that I lean into that, we lean into that very heavily, especially throughout this past year and a half, really leaning into the joy, the communal joy, the collective joy, whenever we have an opportunity to, and just reminding ourselves that this is yes, this is a part of our lives, but we also have joy that we can tap into as well.
I love that. And I completely agree. Looks like we may have lost Kia temporarily. So I will turn that same question. Oh, no, we have her. My apologies.
Yeah, my bad. My internet's terrible.
Yeah, that's the world we live in these days, right? We're at the mercy of internet connections and the noise outside of our homes. You may hear the helicopter going right now as I say that. So Kia, same question, recognizing, sort of all of these experiences that, many of us in our communities are sharing and how much of it has happened at once, right? How do you manage self-care?
I am actually kind of terrible at it, but I find that doing things that have nothing to do with my phone screen help, like listening to music, reading a book, listening to an audiobook. It really helps me ground myself and step back from the constant onslaught of trauma. Because I find that even when I want to escape on Twitter or Instagram, someone somewhere is going to be doing the very thing that I hate, and that's sharing that trauma across, timelines. And so I try really hard to remember that there are things that I enjoy, like listening to music and reading books, and even watching a TV show or a movie, and remembering that that's okay too, that it's all right for me to sit in my joy and to feel something other than complete and utter anger or sadness. And I just really try to focus on the fact that I deserve to feel good, even when I'm in pain, or even when I'm watching a world that does not care about people like me and does not care about our safety or our wellness or our health, that I can care about it for all of us, and that I deserve the chance to give myself the space to feel something other than heartbreak.
Wow. I have chills personally. That resonates with me deeply. I think living in these systems, sometimes the effect of that can be questioning your own worth, right? Or not even realizing you're questioning it. It can be subconscious sometimes, not even realizing that you're not making room for certain things because society has taught you that you're not supposed to, right? That your labor is more important or things like that, right? So I really appreciate you sharing that. Juan, I'll turn the same question to you. And, I ask, to consider another aspect of this that I'd like to sort of parse out here is, thinking about the fact that, we're having an intersectional conversation here. How are you managing self-care when, these traumatic or challenging things are happening and you're sort of experiencing them on behalf of the different identities that you hold that are marginalized, right? Like, so for me, when something happens, violence against the Black community and the trans community in the same day, which unfortunately is way too often. Like, for me, it creates a more of a struggle because I'm holding much more than, maybe just one. So I'm curious, if you have any thoughts on that, if that resonates with you, and, how you look to take care of yourself in moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. This past year, a lot of stuff in terms of immigration and then just the collective fight for that liberation and equity is something that has really impacted me. I try and keep up with the news and stay informed. I think it's important, but I also try to take a step back, try and reframe and just gather myself and think, what can I do in this moment to support and to fight and to lend my voice, my platform to whatever is needed in this time. And there's times that as an advocate, I'm sure everybody else feels the same way. It's frustrating because you don't have the answers. You can't snap your fingers and have things go and be the fairy tale that many people, that's how it's labeled, right? But I think that for me, reminding myself that I am more than one moment, and that is my mantra. I am more than one moment of success, of feeling good, and I am more than one moment of me feeling like a loser or feeling unwell, because there's so much more in between that, and that is my humanity. And validating my own emotions and being kind to myself is extremely crucial. Setting boundaries and talking with my peers, with my people within my in-group, because we're all going through the same thing, but also basking in that unapologetic and radical joy is of extreme importance, because we will fight when we're, called to fight, but we also deserve the time to just be around one another when the world is being unkind, or when your government and your elected officials are being unkind, to just hug one another and be like, okay, maybe the whole world doesn't have you, but I have you, and I have your back, and we will fight through this together.
Wow, you all are really speaking today, and I really appreciate all of the energy you're bringing to this conversation. Juan, you actually touched on the next question that I was going to ask. Thinking about how many of us often have to or choose to lean into community, right? folks who maybe share our identities, who can relate to the experiences and can provide us that support. So I'm curious if you can share, I'll start with you, and then I will turn to Josh and then Kia, and then open it up to Dr. Sue and Kylie. If you can share your, or you want to open it up to sort of your broader communities, experience finding mental health treatment through the healthcare system, and how, within those moments, sometimes there may be the need to sort of shift to look to community. So I actually just realized I combined two of the questions that I was going to ask. So that's, if you're noticing, I'm a little confused right now, that's why. So I'm actually going to boil that down into one question to make sure it's clear. Apologies. So let's start with the first part of that. Can you share your experience finding mental health treatment through the healthcare system specifically? Then we'll transition to talking about experiences finding mental health treatments outside of that, perhaps through community and other sources. Is that clear? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think I got it. I think through the healthcare system, I didn't have the greatest experience, due in part due to finances. Just growing up from a low-income family, that was something that really got in the way of me receiving access to care, as well as just the stigma within my family. And it wasn't until I discovered peer support and just leaning into my community that my life truly changed, and I was able to understand myself, what I was going through much better, and also understand how the mental health system operated. And it was what propelled me to get in this, involved in the mental health field, and now be working, managing this warm line that serves the state of California, where people are able to call and receive that support from someone who maybe has gone through a similar experience like them.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll turn the same question to Josh and then to Kia.
Yeah, so acknowledging, sorry, there's a little noise in the background, but acknowledging that a lot of the support that I received came through higher education. So I was able to access my college's Center for Counseling and Psychological Health. So there's privilege in that, because not everyone is able to access higher education. Not everybody is able to pay for that. Even if there are, some schools do not have a counseling center on campus. And if they do, they're very much overtaxed. And the clinicians there are overtaxed at times. So a lot of my support came in that regard. But then, to Juan's point, a lot of the most formative moments came through peer support, came through wellness studios with support groups for general anxiety, came through masculine identified affirming support groups as well. So a lot of my support in the past, say, 3 or 4 years after working with my therapist came in the form of peer support.
Yes. It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I too shared the experience of, really benefiting from the mental health services from the college that I went, and recognizing that is definitely a privilege. And also, really recognizing the importance of that for many folks, especially in QTBIPOC communities. I know from my end, to the point Juan was making, due to some of the stigma in our communities and things like that, and maybe the folks who came before us didn't have access to some of these treatments. You may not have someone to talk to about it. I know there was a while where I wanted to access services, right? But I didn't know how or how to do that on my own. And it was actually, through college that I was able to start receiving those services, because I didn't have to rely on, my parents' health insurance or something like that. I could go straight through my school. So just recognizing, that there's a lot of importance there. And for folks who, may, have the privilege of being, in that environment, keep that in mind, that can be a resource for you. So I'd actually like to turn that same question to Kia.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of the same as Josh. I had the privilege of a higher education, so I did use the services at my college. But I think for the first 2 years of college, my therapist was not the right fit. My counselor was literally the worst fit for me, and it was a lot of just trying to work through that and not give up until they placed me with someone else. And again, they're backlogged, so it took longer than it should have. Again, the first 2 years, and so for me, I after I graduated college, I didn't know how to access it. I didn't realize that you could just go to your doctor and be like, "Hey, I'm looking for services," and I did eventually do that. But for those 3 or 4 years afterward, I was just talking to my friends and doing that peer support and hoping that people could understand because we lived in these same experiences what I was going through. So it was a mixture of both for me of like using college and then when college was over, sort of panicking and using my peers and then getting back into therapy. So there's so much privilege in that in and of itself as being able to get back into it has really helped me in the long run.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Sue, Kylie, anything you'd like to add on that question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. My experience was completely different with my college therapy. Right off the bat, first session wasn't a good fit. Unfortunately, all the other clinicians looked like the one that I had, and that was something I was not looking for. So at that time, I just stopped and I didn't receive services. It wasn't until actually starting my career that I was like, okay, I'll go through insurance. And so I pulled all the providers that accepted my insurance and I just started making calls based off of photos and bios. Of course, none of them were taking insurance, even though they were listed on my insurance provider list. So then again, I had just given up, right? Like not having that energy to keep trying to find something and then just trying to give it to myself. And so once I had changed employers, it was a different system and got paired with a provider, almost felt like auntie, it was going well, and then started having my problems minimized. And I was like, I'm out. And so it was always a struggle for me finding my own provider. And that's why I was so hard in fighting to be the provider I was looking for. In my different types of careers and employment, I was the one providing services or resources to other people. So that's how I got connected with a lot of private practices, low income services, kind of got all these different things. And I was like, well, I don't really fit, but like you fit with me. So like, can I still get in here? Like, and kind of just figuring out that way, really kind of just a lot of trial and error for me, but a lot of like just giving up and I'm okay. I'll just make it another day. I made it this far. I can just keep carrying the load, right? Like that whole gotta still stay strong, gotta still stay resilient. And I just want people to know you don't have to do that. I don't want anybody to have to go through what I did. It's not fair, it's not right, and it doesn't feel good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That resonates with me a lot. I've had similar experiences at different points in my life. And, it really is a challenge when you want treatment and you want help and you can't find it, or the help you're finding isn't helpful, or worse, it's doing harm. I've been in a number of situations with providers that actively did harm to me that took a lot of work for me to mitigate and, manage, right? So I think, those are all really good points. Dr. Sue, anything that you'd like to share on this? There is sort of another perspective on this that I'd like to bring into this question, thinking about how things like the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted specifically the QTBIPOC communities experience looking for mental health treatments, right? How have like what have you sort of heard from folks or seen during the pandemic that maybe has impacted their search for treatment?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, thank you everyone for sharing and myself too. One thing is looking for a provider that has some responsiveness. Like maybe they don't know everything, right? We have multiple intersectional like identities, values, but if someone can treat you with the respect, even if they don't understand a certain aspect, that they have cultural humility, there may be something to work with. But what's really hurtful, is when somebody, because someone who might share one of our identities, like one of my colleagues was so frustrated as an Asian American person, to have an Asian American therapist be like, oh, I don't think colorism is real, because she'd never heard of it and therefore it's not real. Where this is a really painful, real experience for somebody else. So, right, it's hard to have to find someone who can maybe really work with our multiple identities. Yeah, and for me, it was often searching through networks of people I knew, like who is safe, preferably matching some of my identities, but I'll take one or two, if not all, as long as they have a reputation for working with cultural humility. And I think there are more directories these days for peer supports, for community supports, which I think are so valuable. Family support groups, I often say they provide something that is just as important as what therapists can do. And this is maybe, and that therapists should be able to answer your questions about what's their experience, what's their training, have they done anything different as we talk about COVID-19? For example, as someone who specializes, one of the things is grief work. Well, we are awash in loss and grief, and it has hit BIPOC communities far more than more privileged communities. Not every therapist has grief training. Or for our students, many who had to go home to homes that may not have been gender affirming or identity affirming, and that was really difficult for young adults to be forced back into places that maybe were not healthy. We created sort of a like guide, but there were barriers. Some of our students who left California, we were not allowed to see them even during telehealth because of bureaucracies around what state we're licensed in. So I think being really creative about these tools that we are all as professionals and community members trying to provide people, how do we get through these really difficult, unprecedented, multiply challenging times?
Yeah, absolutely. And that provides a wonderful transition. These next couple of questions, I'm going to pose specifically to Dr. Sue and Kylie, and then open it up to the rest of the panel. Dr. Sue, we can start with you and then turn to Kylie. To your point, there's so much that has happened over the past experiences, oftentimes related to our sexual orientation, gender identity expression.
And breathing and being healthy. The long haul work will always be there. I think AAPA went to our first Black Lives Matter rally 5 years ago. So this work has to be paced because otherwise we will burn out.
Yes. Kylie, same question to you.
Definitely, I affirm what was just said by Dr. Sue, and that we have to kind of build out a plan, right? And this is to rebuild our energy, rebuild our reserves for what we can give out. And so that's reconnecting with those things that fill it up, right? If that means taking a long bubble bath, take a long bubble bath. If that means stretching with your feet in the grass, do that, right? You know what feels best for you. You know what fills up your cup. Allow yourself to do that, and allow yourself to say, I'm at capacity. I have to step back from this. I need to go fill up my cup. I need to do this for myself, because otherwise it'd just be this cycle, like putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery. It's going to keep bleeding, right? But if we
think of, as we start to look at ways to cope, for me, one thing that I turned to during the pandemic that I'm wondering if this resonates with folks is, I sort of, in almost like a funny way, tried to think about, how can I be the most selfish right now, right? Like, what are the things that are my guilty pleasures? What are the things that I know no matter what will put a smile on my face? What are the things that literally make me feel good, not necessarily thinking about trying to be mindful of the thing that made me feel good that could cause harm, right? Trying to balance that, but thinking, just really, what is it? What makes me smile? So I ended up, every morning, and I still do it. I listen to like a couple of comedy podcasts so that I'm starting every day laughing. Because for me personally, if you're listening to the right comedian, generally, or a comedian that resonates with you, you can probably laugh through a lot of different experiences. So that's one of the things I did, just really looked at all of those different things, music, food. I'll say it again, food. Really just leaning into all of those things that helped me sort of get past that first threshold, to your point, Dr. Sue, just how do I get through this, right? And then starting to look beyond that. I'm wondering if that resonates with anybody to share on that.
I mean, I watched a lot of Ted Lasso. That made me feel better. It's really a TV show on Apple TV Plus that sort of made me feel good. So I would like let the episodes build up and then watch one when I was feeling at my lowest at the start of my day. And I am very terrible at telling people that I'm at capacity and that I need to take a step back. So any tips on those would be great on that. But also just thinking about, like you said, we deserve to start each day with laughter, starting each day with something that makes us feel good about whatever it is we're doing for that day.
Thank you. So turning back to our questions, this is the last one for Dr. Sue and Kylie, and then I'll turn back to our other panelists. So for those in the QTBIPOC communities that may be considering finding a culturally responsive and LGBTQ affirming mental health professional, how can treatment help them navigate trauma and even violence related to their identities, right? So we know there are folks who, maybe this isn't something that they're interested in right now, or they're having trouble finding it. But there are some folks who maybe are interested in it, and maybe, they're on the fence trying to think about, well, what can I gain from this? Can you help us understand what kind of things an affirming and, culturally responsive mental health professional can help us sort of navigate through treatment? And I'll start with Kylie, then turn to Dr. Sue, and then open it to everyone else.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. If you have a mental health professional or wellness provider that you resonate with, that you trust, you feel safe with, you've created a bond with, you're able to discuss several different things as far as the way you cope, initiating new coping strategies even, or even further understanding too what you can or can't control in these times, and how you react to it, right? So understanding that maybe this is some of the intergenerational trauma that I'm carrying, and this is why I'm reacting this way. So now that I know that, I can start to heal this, I can go on this journey of healing, and now I can change that. I can rewrite, in a sense, my own history and my history going forward as well, right? I'm healing my family, I'm healing my community. This isn't something we have to carry anymore, right? Even too, when you're working through this, there may be times I don't even know how to voice what I'm feeling, or I don't even know how to say that I'm at capacity. And you have somebody to help you. You have somebody to kind of carry that with you, or at least sift through it, right? You like have this big pile of everything and you're like, where do I even start? Well, your wellness provider, your professional, they can help you. Just pick it all out, order it nice, neatly, and it's all there for you. You're the one ultimately guiding that, but they're just there to help you. They're there to walk along with you. And that's very beneficial in ways when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel alone even, we feel like I'm the only one who's experiencing this, I'm the only one who knows this, and turn to find out you're not. But now you also...
It's about how do we code switch when we need to? How do we reconstitute ourselves? Our body minds are capable of healing from incredible things, but we are also holding, as Kylie has mentioned, intergenerational traumas, and we have to pace how we do this, and how we survive. Like, yes, we're resilient, but we should also be able to fully flourish and enjoy while we're here, take it at a pace. And also, that's what boundaries are a lot about. Like, maybe some of this is not my thing to deal with, and I'm going to put it back where it belongs, right? Like refusing emotional licks, and being able to give feedback to your therapist. So, as I say, yes, we're resilient, but why do things the slow, more painful, and hard way? If there's someone there who can carve out a little confidential space where you can like throw it all out there and go through it in company of somebody.
Yeah, that one. And Kia, thinking about that, and for those who have access and have the privilege there, what are the things they can get from it? What are things maybe you've gotten from your work with a provider?
I mean, something that I always say, and I've written it when you're sad, you can do preemptive work, and to talk about things you're having good feelings, and you're so used to trauma and pain, being able to recognize that therapy is more than just, hey, I'm like, how do I make sure that I can momentum that I'm on, these good feelings that I have? How can I make sure that I'm showing that I love in a positive way? It's not to feel these negative feelings, which is also very bad, but I do think that therapy is more than just going when you're upset. It's preempt what's best for yourself in the long term, not just when you feel like you're at your lowest. You can go ahead and do that preemptive work as well, and that's what's helped me too.
Absolutely. Josh, Juan, anything to add before we move on to our next question?
Yeah. For me, therapy was a huge help in regards to relating to my identity as a change agent, as someone who is in service, because it was very easy to craft an identity around, I'm the person that helps people, I'm the person that people call on, I'm the person that people lean on, and you can create, like I said, you can create identity around that about yourself, and you begin to associate the love and the care that you can receive with what you can do for other people, and really understand that, no, I have intrinsic self-worth because I'm me. I deserve nice things because I'm a good person. I just deserve nice things because I exist. Of course, we work hard. All of us on this call do great, important work, and we still have intrinsic value outside of the work that we do for other people. And therapy was very instrumental in helping me understand that.
Thank you. That all resonates with me. And Juan, I'm going to turn it over to you for your thoughts, flagging for folks that we're in our last maybe 8 minutes or 7 minutes or so. So I'm actually going to open our second to last question to you, Juan, and then open our last question shortly after that for all of the panelists so we can close out. So thinking about all the things we've chatted about today, curious about your thoughts around some of the ways that QT-BIPOC communities can feel empowered to identify treatments and resources that resonate with their identities and experiences.
Yeah, I think starting by asking locally or with our leaders in nonprofit settings, because if they don't have it, and I think that's something that is crucial, but also just making sure that you're seeking the resources where you feel comfortable and not being tokenized. I feel like oftentimes our community, especially in the field, unfortunately is tokenized by different organizations to ensure that we are guiding ourselves and where we feel safe is important. And for me personally, what I've seen the most is that there's a lot of frustration that comes up when we aren't able to find that therapist right away that fits our needs. And it's important to not give up and seeking that support, even though at times you want to throw everything out the window and just be like, I don't want to see anyone anymore. Because I do think by repressing our feelings, we do worse for ourselves and our bodies. And also, I know that it's the reality of just a system that was set up not to serve people who might look like us or identify as.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And, Dr. Sue, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts on the same question. And then we can go to Kia, then Josh, then Kylie. Thinking about, sort of this question about how folks can feel empowered. I know, Dr. Sue, one of the things you mentioned a moment ago was sort of asking those questions, right, of providers. And I know for me, that's one of the things that I found very, very helpful. HRC and Mental Health America actually released a resource last year on questions that QTBIPOC communities can ask providers to try and help them navigate, their process of assessing whether that person is affirming or not. And I know I followed a number of those items, when looking for a provider this time around. And, I think it takes some practice, right, to get used to asking some of these questions, because sometimes it can feel a little bit awkward. But, I honestly didn't even know prior to really working on that resource that some of these questions were available to me to ask, right? Like, I didn't know it was okay to ask, like, well, have you treated other Black patients? Have you ever treated a trans?
Absolutely. Just can't say it enough. You absolutely have the right to ask questions. Make sure it's a good investment of your resources, your time, your heart, and your spirit. That, it doesn't have to be personal. If we're not a good fit, then we're just not a good fit, and we can part, and we can each find people we work better with. Right. Being clear about your values, what you need, and that they should be supportive of the other things you do for wellness too. As a psychologist, I would never say like all you need is therapy. No, you need dance or art or your community or, rest. What are these other things? Food, absolutely. Right. So they should really see you as the whole person. That therapy is meant to empower you and be a piece of your journey, but you're still the expert in your own life. We just bring our training and our sort of hive mind experience, but it's in your service. And that's how your therapist really should see you.
That's amazing, and a perfect transition to our last question that I'm going to start. I'm forgetting the order that I had initially said, but we can. I'll start with turning this to Josh, then Kylie, then Kia, and then we can circle back to Juan and Dr. Sue if we have time to add any final thoughts. We're right under about 2 minutes. So, thinking about the fact that, especially in QT-BIPOC communities, our communities have had numerous ways to access wellness well before therapy and other forms of clinical treatments.
As Sue said, we I can say confidently every clinician that I know / am associated with is either has studied Kemetic yoga or Reiki or that we have throughout the diaspora, Southeast Asia, as a part of our healing rituals. They do their works relegated as aspects of our spirituality that have been demonized in Western society.
Absolutely. Kylie?
Indigenous practices we do, and Dr. Sue said, as a support. Pull it out and day dinner, things that we will bring community together and bring about that healing as well.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Kia?
I mean, literally echoing what everybody else is saying. I firmly believe that joy is revolutionary too. And so anything that you can do that feels good for you is just as valuable as therapy to me, like eating good food and watching good movies and TV shows and sharing space with people who matter to you. I love a good dance party, a little solo dance party like on Grey's Anatomy or something. I think all that stuff is valuable, and it's really important that we make sure that we're giving people the space to also do those things with therapy as an added support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Juan, Dr. Sue, anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm just affirming everything they said. The mental health field and just in general resources are not a one size fits all. So tapping into what brings us joy, dancing, eating a good meal, and just things that connect us to our identities and to our culture is needed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Everyone's been practicing, and yeah, I think joy is revolutionary. Thank you, Kia. Dr. Tama has said justice is therapeutic, right? And community. So even sharing spaces like this where people realize how much we do have in common. I mean, the joy of my entire career has been collaborating with ABPSI, Black Psychologists, the National Latinx Psych Association, Indian psychologists, Middle Eastern, North Africa. Like, working with these orgs helps me to also feel less fatigued and tired and know that we do have allies, accomplices, and collaborators and other family out there. So community also on top of all of this. And thank you for sharing this space with us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, with that, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. I've personally really enjoyed this conversation. I think folks will get a lot out of it. Any closing remarks that anyone would like to have? I'll just give folks maybe 5 seconds just to close out and maybe share where folks can find you and follow your work. I'll go with Kia, Juan, Kylie, Josh, and then Dr. Sue.
I'm everywhere on social media at Kia, Keah _Maria, Maria. You can find my work at kiabrown.com. And I think one thing I want to leave people with is the knowledge that who you are as you are is enough, just like you are.
Yes. Juan?
Great. Well, thank you for having me. You can find my work at juanacostaofficial.com, and you can find me on socials at juanacosta with 2 underscores at the end. I just, again, want to restate that you are more than one moment. You are more than what society has told you you are, and just bask in that radical joy and be yourself.
Yes, I love this. Kylie?
Yes, I'll lead you to my agency or my private practice page, which is the Indigenous Circle of Wellness. You can also just reach us at ICO Wellness. We have all of our community engagement flyers up, all of our events that we're hosting, as well as highlighting all of our wellness providers as well. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and share space, as well as just kind of gain knowledge and share knowledge all in this beautiful space.
Thank you. Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. You can find me on social media at Healing While Black. You also find me on my website, healingwhileblack.me, as in me, myself, and I. You can email me at josh@healingwhileblack.me. And yes, like, we have so much community here. We have so much love here. We have so much support here. And just please tap in with folks, tap in with the HRC if resources and support are needed, but we got each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Sue?
Yes. You can find the Asian American Psych Association online or on Instagram at AAPA Online. And I am also at Hella Mental Health. Hella, for any of you, is very, for those who know Northern California. And under my name, I have a YouTube page where I have some small videos too, also with tips. But basically, I just really hope the takeaway is that you have everything you need. It's a matter of balancing and finding the resources and supports that you're already whole. And really, it's about calling in the community, whether ancestral or present now, to help you find that balance of your wholeness.
Yes. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think that is the perfect note for us to close out the 5th annual panel discussion on QTBIPOC mental health. So thank you to all of our wonderful panelists, and thank you to all of you at home for watching this. Please share it with folks in your community so that folks can understand more about the experiences of QTBIPOC folks in mental health. And please continue to focus on your wellness. And we hope that you'll join us next year for our next panel. Thank you all so much, and take care.